Alright, YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 125 on the Liber Vaccae, the Book of the Cow, which several people mentioned to me. Some people were telling me, oh, here, it's full of weird content. Others are like, oh, have you read it? Can you do a video on it? I have not read it in full, but I've read segments of and a synopsis of its basic material. And yeah, it's weird. The Book of the Cow is one of these works from times past, where extremely strange ritualism is mentioned on its surface in a literal context. Now, this is not the only work. If you're interested in the really weird, warped, diabolical side of the occult, almost all of which is a thinly veiled guise in which something scientific or political is masquerading in, check out the Little Albert. Read the Grand Grimoire, read the Grimorium Verum. Those would be the big three. The Black Pullet to a lesser extent. That's not really diabolical, though. It's actually sort of a heartwarming tale when you really think about it. About half of the work is the backstory, essentially. And then there's the actual magical ritualism. It's an interesting work. Often these works come from French lore, and They have some weird stuff in them. Like, I can't remember whether it was the Grimorium Verum or the Petit Albert. But there's one ritual where you take, I believe it is a bucket of water and squid ink and a few other ingredients, and you do some hocus pocus over them, so to speak. And by applying it to someone's home, you can put them under the illusion that their home is literally filled inside with water, like there's an ocean inside of their home and stuff like that. A lot of this was accomplished through hallucinogenics over time. The use of deliriants and intoxicants of various kinds in the medieval and Renaissance eras was common. As such, when people were high off these things, it was often at the time taken as evidence of witchcraft, no less. Witching ointment is quite literally just hallucinogenics applied to the skin to make the person probably, literally feel as though they're flying around. Anyone else watching them is just seeing them wander through the woods shrieking and making unintelligible noises. With the Liber Vaccae, the content that is of most interest to people is the creation of the homunculus. This is literally the creation of a person using nothing more than the magician or sorcerer or alchemist sperm, chemically treated in various ways. I believe that this is where I specifically read about the practice of beating off into a clay urn full of herbs, and then you'd seal it up and humidify it and stuff, and a baby would come out or something like that. It's very weird. You're supposed to have sex with animal corpses as part of this, as well as doing other things to their corpses. Usually, and because I have not read the entire work and I can't fully analyze it, I can't say this definitively, but my hunch is that it's probably like some of these other diabolical works, where the magical lore, which is, universally at the time especially going to be seen as pure evil. It's like this person's possessed not just by demons, but must be possessed by the devil himself if they're doing this. That is just a facade which has a hidden message. The creation of the homunculus is probably, in alchemical terms, it's probably an allusion to some sort of chemical process, as opposed to, oh yeah, you're literally supposed to do these things. That's often what you get within alchemy. When you're talking about distillation and reverberation and purification and sublimation and stuff, you're talking about quite literal chemical processes, but they're given a spiritual meaning. This is the case with less diabolical works in some cases too. You get a work that, pure alchemy or something, it uses spiritual terms like the king and the queen, their marriage bed, the slaying of the prince, that sort of stuff. What it's referring to is a chemical process through which something is being created, generally either counterfeit goods, which I believe is alluded to specifically within the Petit Albert, either the creation of counterfeit gold or silver or something along those lines, or the creation of some sort of medicinal compound. Oftentimes it's lead-based or mercury-based, probably not the healthiest thing to actually ingest, but it is, you can create it. The tincture of the philosophers is a real thing. aurum potabile is a real thing. You can actually create colloidal gold. It's just they thought it was some sort of potent medicine because it's like, oh, well, gold is incorruptible, yet we managed to dissolve it. How the hell did we manage to do this? And then they drink it, and they would assume, you know, if they didn't die outright, they would assume, oh, well, it's not poisonous. It must be some miraculous medicine. Then they found out it does have certain medical applications, and they extrapolated from that. Then it was a universal medicine in some cases. So alchemy is half true. When we're talking about a homunculus, it's probably an alchemical statement. This might be quite literally an alchemical work that's just very, very thickly laid upon, as opposed to an actual hand guide of literally disinterring corpses and fornicating with them and you know, boiling their skulls away or whatever the hell else you're supposed to do as part of these processes. This is not, by the way, the concept of the homunculus, the concept of bringing forth life in general, where there was no life, the concept of spontaneous generation through some material means is not solely limited to this work. It's spoken of in numerous alchemical texts. Generally speaking, I believe it was one of Hollandus' works, if I remember correctly, but I may be wrong, so don't quote me on that. One of these works, and I believe it was Hollandus, speaks of the process, for instance, of sterilizing earth, taking sterile earth, hydrating it, and then life comes forth. Now, they use the term plants. It's probably talking about mold of some sort, or a mushroom, something like that. They were simply not quite identifying the cause of the generation of the... I mean, they were witnessing the growth of mold or plants or something. They didn't quite understand the concept of full sterilization. They didn't quite understand the concept of contamination necessarily either. So to them it seemed miraculous if you know, completely excoriated this lump of sand and dirt and heated it and did all these other things to purify it and then sealed it off, hydrated it, but it still gave rise to living things. Well, they weren't taking into consideration, well, what if the water's contaminated by mold spores? What if you didn't fully sterilize it or something like that? They thought it was miraculous. They thought it was evidence that life generates on its own in the absence of life spontaneously. So you've got some misconstrued material in these works. And this work here with its homunculus and its fornicate with the cow skeleton sort of stuff is no exception to that. You have things that are deliberately veiled. That is, there's a deeper message you're supposed to be reading. The Grand Grimoire has a political message in it. It does. It's like the most popular diabolical grimoire short of the Lesser Keys themselves, and it is primarily a political tract. I've released it. You know, you wouldn't believe how many thousands of people have bought copies of that. What they don't realize, I try to point this out within the text that I released, is that if you look at the later pages of it, you can see it's really a statement against the church and against monarchism. That's really at its core what it's entirely possible that the rest of the work itself is just total filler. It was put there so that it would look like a spell book as opposed to a political manuscript. You're living in that just pre-Enlightenment era. Which one's more dangerous? People think you're a sorcerer or people think you're a revolutionary? Well, if you're European, probably the latter. At that point, the burning times have died out. They no longer care if you're practicing magic. People may think that you're weird. People may think you're evil and shun you, but they're probably not going to lop your head off for it. They're probably not going to hang you from a tree for it. But if you're a revolutionary, yeah, your government will. No, they'll be more than happy to. They can't try you for witchcraft, but they certainly can for being a dissident. And so that's the core message of what the Grand Grimoire honestly really is about. I would hazard a guess that the laying it on pretty thick diabolical stuff in the Liber Vaccae, including just a few short segments from it that actually appear in English. I'm not even sure that there's a full English translation. There are several partial translations, obviously. I would assume that that probably has some deeper philosophical message that it's not quite presenting on its surface. That being said, I'd like to obtain a full translation. I believe it appears in several different actual extant manuscripts. which may or may not be fully adequate, let's face it. Sometimes translations are better than others, or analysis of work secondhand. Sometimes you have a text, it's like the Red Book of Appin. It's spoken of, but we don't have a full description of it, nor do we have the text itself. When they say veterinary medicine, but also grimoire, I say it's probably like the Petit Albert. In fact, they might be talking about the precursor to the Petit Albert on that text. Liber Vaccae, no exception. Diabolical work, like the Grimorium Verum or something like that. Generally speaking, they weren't meant to be taken 100% literally. It's the same is true of alchemy. Some of it's symbolic. Some of it is an allusion to some physical thing that is quite mundane, and they couched it in spiritual terms, and especially in evil terms. In some cases, to frighten people off, to keep them from reading it, to keep them from meddling with it, and trying to fathom what it actually meant. It's a good overall strategy. It apparently worked. Most of these texts, despite the fact that they were banned, and pogroms and burnings and stuff, most of them survived. They're still actually there, so the strategy paid off long term. Centuries later, all of these works are still within the realm of human literature. That's about all. Peace out.